Next up we have Laura Sampliner to speak about the City of Coquitlam's Climate Action Plan.
So, as Georgia said, my name is Laura Sampliner. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Manager, another City of Coquitlam staff member here tonight to share an exciting opportunity as well to get involved with our Climate Action Plan, which is currently in development. So today, what I'm hoping to cover is just some important background information about the Climate Action Plan itself, what the project is, and go over some of our key priority areas that we're using to frame up the plan, and also encourage you to share your feedback, and then we'll go over some next steps on where we're at with the plan itself. And next slide, please. So before we dive in, I'd just like to introduce our team at the city. So we've got a couple of folks in the room tonight. So we have Kara Silk, who's in the back over there. She's the manager of environment and really leading the environment team at the city. We've also got Karen Johnson over there, who's our sustainability program specialist. And I've already introduced myself, but a few members who aren't with us this evening but are also playing a key role in the plan's development are Laura Beatty and Ryan Voon. And so we've got a really great, passionate and inspiring team here at the city working on all things climate action and sustainability. So next slide. Okay, so you may be wondering why we need a climate action plan, or maybe not, because we already have an environmental sustainability plan, but I'll get into the why in a moment here. But if we advance to the next slide, before we actually dive into that question, I'd first like to share some of the common terms that we'll be using throughout the presentation. So we have this beautiful graphic there in the middle. So if you focus on the left-hand side of the climate action graphic, we have what we call climate mitigation. And so this is referring to all the actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's really focusing on how we pull carbon out of the atmosphere, how we prevent emissions from being put out into the atmosphere. But on the other end of this diagram, on the right-hand side, we have climate adaptation. And so that's a lot of what Aaron was just speaking about around how we prepare for the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing. So that extreme heat, that flooding, the wildfires, and air quality issues. So when we look at both climate mitigation and adaptation and really talk about the marrying of these two climate action focused streams, we call that low carbon resilience. And this is really important as we dive into the climate action plan because it really ensures that we're harnessing the co-benefits of looking at both opportunities to reduce emissions and prepare for climate impacts at the same time. And my favorite example of this is you can have a really energy efficient home or building that's low carbon, but if you don't add cooling, then you really miss that opportunity to be prepared for those climate impacts. Or maybe it's built on a floodplain, so it's not really resilient to flooding impacts. So when we think about both of these aspects together, it really ensures that we're prepared for the impacts, but also meeting our mitigation targets as well. As Erin went over in her presentation, we're seeing all the impacts of climate change really extensively in our community, a lot sooner than we thought would happen as well. And so through our climate adaptation strategic plan, which I won't touch on too much beyond just to say that we've identified a series of climate risks, which are on the right-hand side there of the screen, just some icons to really showcase, how we're thinking about the different impacts that we are currently seeing and that we expect to see more of and in more intensity in the future. So it's a really important lens as we're going into development of the climate action plan itself. And next slide. So, back in January of 2022, we approved the Environmental Sustainability Plan, and this plan actually set the stage for adopting new science-based targets that are aligned with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and also aligned with our other surrounding jurisdictions, as well as different levels of government as well. So we've got those new targets that are, if you advance the next animation, there they are. So these are our greenhouse gas reduction targets that we're working towards. And so that's 45% emissions reductions by 2030 and then carbon neutrality by 2050. So this is really our guiding framework for an action that's coming out of the Environmental Sustainability Plan. So if you advance, perfect, which is to develop the Climate Action Plan itself. So the ESP, or the Environmental Sustainability Plan, is really our overarching sustainability framework. And through that plan, we identified the need to develop a specific pathway to reach these targets, which is our Climate Action Plan. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm finally going to answer that question, why we need a climate action plan. So, I mean, as we've talked about extensively already, we're already experiencing these climate impacts. So we need to be prepared for those, and we need to prevent those events from continuing to happen in greater frequency and intensity. And as you've already heard, we've committed to those new greenhouse gas reduction targets. So we need a pathway and a plan to help us achieve those targets, and some clear and measurable actions to really help us get there as well. And having a plan like this really helps us open up the door to other opportunities. As Erin pointed out, other funding opportunities that come available, or maybe there's some strategic or creative partnerships that we could be working with other groups to advance some of these solutions, and also leaving some flexibility in there for new technology that comes on board to really help us achieve those targets. And then, as I mentioned before, we're really looking to harness those co-benefits. So when we do climate action initiatives, there's also a lot of other positive outcomes that happen. So when we start thinking about moving more towards active transportation, we're taking cars off the road potentially and, reducing the traffic impacts that we have in our community. So there's a lot of other co-benefits that we're trying to harness through this plan. And then we're also a part of a global community. So Coquitlam may not be the biggest city in the world, but given that we're moving more towards urbanization and most of the population lives in an urban environment, we really need to do our part by taking advantage of those opportunities as we grow to ensure that our community is sustainable. And so we recognize that there's a lot that needs to happen at all levels of government and across the globe to really make a difference in climate action and to reduce our targets. But this plan is really going to focus in and look at the opportunities that are within our control as a community and within us as individuals and the choices that we make to help reduce our emissions and to help us better prepare for climate change. And next slide. Okay, so what we hope will be in the plan. So building upon the foundations that were set out in the environmental sustainability plan, as I mentioned, we're hoping the climate action plan will outline that detailed pathway to get us towards our targets. And we've used key priority areas to really frame up how we are going to outline some of the actions that we think are going to be in the plan. And those actions, we really need to be clear and measurable so that we have a clear way to get us to those targets. So as I also mentioned before, using that low carbon resilience lens, we're in the same vein considering how we're going to adapt to climate change and considering that along with these opportunities to reduce emissions. And the plan, we would like to outline some of the costs and the benefits and trade-offs of some of these actions that we're taking, and also working in tandem with other city strategic planning processes that are underway, such as the Urban Forest Management Strategy and the Strategic Transportation Plan update that's also underway currently. And we'd also, hope to identify how we're going to fund this plan. These actions are great to have a list of them, but when the rubber hits the road, it's really in terms of how we get them into implementation and how we fund them. And next slide. So in terms of timing, and now that we know a bit more about what a climate action plan is and what's in it, let's talk about how it kind of all comes together in terms of timing. So we're planning to complete the climate action plan in 4 phases. And so we've completed phase 1 and 2 so far. And in phase 1, we were, reflecting on our progress and what we've done as a community so far, but also identifying some of those challenge areas or gaps and where, other communities and where we've seen successes in some areas as well to help harness that. In phase 2, we were working to complete a technical analysis, and so that included laying out some modeling of how far we could really get towards our emissions reduction targets in certain sectors. And then in phase 3, which is the one we're currently in, we're really excited to have the opportunity to talk with groups such as yourself and the public and other interested community members in helping to shape the plan and the actions that go into it. And then ideally, we'll package all of that up into a draft climate action plan and present that to council. And we're hoping to get to that stage in mid-2024 to have the plan finalized. And next slide. Okay, so I've mentioned quite a number of times that the climate action plan will help us reduce our emissions. But first, we need to understand where those emissions are coming from. And so we've got 2 kind of graphics on this screen. And I just want to point out that while some level of carbon is important for regulating the global climate, too much carbon can and is actually leading to a lot of those climate impacts that we're seeing today. So in order to take effective action, we really need to understand where our biggest sources are coming from and then target those areas. So we've broken down the carbon pollution on the screen into two categories. So the first one at the top is all of the carbon pollution that comes from our community. So what's produced within the city of Coquitlam boundaries. The graphic on the bottom is what us as the city of Coquitlam through our operations contributes to that broader community greenhouse gas emissions. So it's clear that from both city operations and for the community that transportation and buildings are the largest source of emissions. And so on the transportation side, this largely comes from the combustion of fossil fuels like diesel and gasoline. So a lot from vehicles. And on the buildings front, this is from typically the operation of buildings. So heating, cooling, hot water, and that's contributing most there. And then we also have waste that's playing a big role here too. And I just want to point out that this is really a snapshot of emissions. This is, and what's kind of used in operation in our daily lives, but doesn't necessarily reflect all of the impacts that happen across the life cycle of all of these assets within these areas. So it's not reflective of, the full life cycle of a product that you buy that has come from somewhere else in the world and has traveled all the way to your door, and then how it ends up in the landfill. We're just looking at the part where it ends up in the landfill and the impact from there. And so if anyone's curious too, these numbers, so on the community side, this comes from our provincial community energy and emissions inventory, which is produced by the province, and that's available online, any of that data. And then our city operations side is information that we get from our utilities that we pay, from our fleet services that we purchase fuel for, and then from the waste and the lighting and all that that we manage. So next slide. Okay, and we can go one more there too. Okay, so based on our greatest sources of carbon pollution, these are the priority areas where we know we need to make the biggest changes in order to reduce our emissions and meet our targets, hopefully. So it's important to note that these priority areas are also all connected and overlap. So a change in one area affects a change potentially in another area. So they are all interrelated. So in the next few slides, I'll go through where we would like to go in each of these priority areas and what this may look like, or a few examples of actions in these areas. And these priority areas are informed by and based on a review of what we've seen in other communities and jurisdictions and some of the existing policies and programs that are out there, and our high-level modeling that we completed in that phase 2 that we talked about. And this is also based on what we know is happening at other levels of government as well. So the province has their wonderful Clean BC plan, the federal plans as well. So we're taking all of that into consideration through this. So, and I just want to note that also that these are intended to be a starting point. We're very much in development of the plan itself. So what you will see here will likely be refined over the coming months, and we're looking forward to your feedback on this as well. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, so the first priority area is how we build, and this includes all of the homes and buildings in a community. So anything from houses, townhomes, offices, apartment stores, schools, cultural buildings, and all others. And most of the carbon pollution in this area, as I noted, comes from the use of fossil fuels. So mainly this is actually natural gas fed to produce heat and hot water for all of our daily needs. So reducing carbon pollution in this area means that we're switching away from fossil fuels and towards more low carbon renewable sources such as electricity or solar, for example. So you could look at replacing your furnace or boiler with a heat pump is a great example of an action in this area. And next slide. Moving on to the how we move priority area, this includes all of the ways that we get around in our communities. So that's from walking, rolling, cycling, through to public transportation, single occupancy vehicles, buses, trucks, all of that. And so, as I mentioned too, most of the carbon pollution from this priority area comes from the combustion of fossil fuels. Again, just a different fuel type. So we're looking at diesel and gasoline mostly in this area that's causing the carbon pollution. So if we're moving away again from that carbon pollution, we're switching away from fossil fuel burning fuels. So a great example is taking public transit or switching, if public transit or active transportation doesn't really work for you, then switching your gas vehicle to an electric source or a hydrogen source or something that's more low carbon. And next slide. Okay, the how we consume area includes all of the products that we buy and the waste that comes from it. And so most of the carbon pollution in this area, as I mentioned, comes from the collection and the disposal of waste in landfills. And as I alluded to, that's not quite the full picture of everything in this category, but is a helpful snapshot to help guide our work. So reducing carbon pollution in this area means that we're making sure that the goods and materials are produced and reused in a circular manner, and that we're avoiding waste going to the landfill as much as possible. So, for example, we could reduce the single-use items that you use in your daily life, or participate in a garage sale or a repair cafe like the one that happened a few weeks ago, or visit a farmer's market and support your local food economy. And next slide. Okay, our last priority area. So how we steward includes the ecosystems and the green spaces within our community that I know this group values a lot. And this includes our parks, our forests, our watershed, our rivers and wetlands, and all of the urban green spaces in the community as well. And so these systems not only provide a lot of important ecosystem benefits, like cleaning our water and our air, but they're also important ways of providing storage for carbon and sequestering carbon. And they can also help us better prepare for climate impacts in the community. So Erin noted a lot on, tree canopy reduces cooling needs and provides that shade and shelter during those hot times. But this is also an important thing for us to consider in the broader context of climate action and our direction in that area. So it's really important for us to steward the land correctly and prioritizing conservation and restoration efforts. And that includes many of the actions that we've spoken on and heard about tonight. So you could look at joining a tree planting program, or maybe look at installing some green infrastructure like a rain garden or a green roof on your home or your business. Those are some really great examples of actions in this area. And next slide. Okay. So what's next? Thank you. So hopefully that was a bit inspiring, probably some information that you already knew, maybe some new information, but we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback is going to be really helpful to us in shaping the plan itself. And what we're really hoping to understand from groups like yourself and from the general public is, what are the challenges that you face in each of these key priority areas in making changes? And what are some of the things that inspire you or would motivate you or do motivate you to make changes in these areas? And so your feedback here is going to be really helpful to us in crafting a more meaningful and tailored action list that reflects the needs and priorities of Coquitlam as a community and those who work and live and play here. And so what we're going to do with that feedback is summarize it in what we call a What We Heard report that gets shared publicly with Council and will help us, as I mentioned, shape the actions in the Climate Action Plan. So it's a really great opportunity today to get involved, and I'll share on the next slide. I think we've got some opportunities, some specific opportunities for how you can get involved in this plan, starting right now if you haven't already. So we've got a survey that's open right now until November 19th. So if you haven't filled that out, please feel free to fill that out, share it with your friends, family, and networks. The QR code on the screen takes you directly to the survey. We've also got a couple paper copies here in person if you'd like to take some home with you. We are at a few pop-up events and have been over the past couple of weeks, and we've got a few more coming up. So you can catch us at Ibex Cafe this weekend on Saturday if you want to chat further, as well as a couple other ones that are coming up. And then we're continuing to also have key conversations with some groups, so community groups like yourself, continuing to conversate and to learn from those groups and the perspectives and be able to package all of that up and help us shape the plan itself. So yeah, I think I've covered and talked for quite a bit here. So I think I've just got a last slide there. Do I? Oh, a thank you slide. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.